Scenes depicted in this video are of a sensitive and violent nature. As such, viewer discretion is advised. Chicago in 1956. The Grimes sisters, aged 15 and 12, would vanish when returning from a movie theatre. The inseparable sisters were huge Elvis Presley fans and had been at the theatre that night to see Love Me Tender. After the credits rolled at the end, they would head home. But they would never get there. This would spark the largest missing persons inquiry in Chicago's history, and would even see one of the most famous stars in the world at that time making a personal plea on TV and radio. The murder of the Grimes sisters has been described by authors as the crime that shattered the innocence of Chicago. So what happened to them? Were they abducted? Why did it take almost a month before they were found? Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Let's find out what happened to the Grimes sisters. Barbara and Patricia Grimes were only 15 and 12 when they went missing that fateful night back in 1956. They were two of 7 kids born to parents Loretta and Joseph Grimes. Although Joseph and Loretta would divorce in 1951, and although the children remained with their mother, things were fairly amicable between the parents, and with Joseph still living nearby, all of the Grimes kids still had a functional relationship with their father. The girls would be described as good, decent girls. They were well-mannered and well-behaved. Due to the slight age gap though, they would attend different schools, with Patricia attending St. Maurice Catholic Elementary School, and Barbara, being the oldest, had moved on to Thomas Kelly High School. Although the sisters attended different schools, they still remained very close, and besides the obvious sibling connection, they were good friends and would often do everything together. Chicago in the 50s was rich and diverse, with people from all walks of life and backgrounds flocking to the city. Streetcars and poodle skirts were the most common sights, but for the Grimes sisters, one passion they both shared was the music of Elvis Presley. One afternoon, after returning from school, the sisters were eagerly flipping through an issue of the Chicago Sun-Times. There was a centerfold poster of Elvis that could join the other pictures of the singer on the girls' bedroom wall. It was in this same publication that they found an advert to join the official Elvis fan club, something that their mother was only too happy to allow. They were good girls, like I said, and, like so many young women in the 50s, Elvis seemed like a healthy obsession. It was a Friday night on the 28th of December in 1956. Barbara and Patricia had big plans. They would be attending the Brighton Theatre to watch Elvis in the movie Love Me Tender. At this point, their mother would of course give them the usual warnings that mothers would when such young girls were venturing out. Be safe. But then Loretta was not overly worried, as this would be the 11th time that the girls had been to that theatre to watch the same movie. Nonetheless, she would ensure the girls were equipped for the short walk there and back. Jackets on, gloves on, and here's a wee bit of money for some popcorn. Barbara, the oldest, was entrusted with the funds for the night, $2.50, with Loretta reminding her to keep 50 cents of that in her side zipper pocket, in case the pair wanted to stay and watch the second screening of the movie, which they had always chosen to do. At 7:30 p.m, the girls excitedly bundled out of the door of their McKinley Park home in the southwest of the city. Although the girls would either walk the short mile and a half to the movie theatre or get the bus at a bus stop near to their home, it was agreed that more often than not they would decide to walk there and get the bus home. See, walking there meant that they would save more money and therefore more popcorn at intermission. Once inside the theatre, the girls would take their seats. They would briefly say hi to one of Patricia's friends, Dorothy Weinert, who was also there with her sister. At intermission, as the crowds filtered out into the foyer, the girls decided to stay for the second showing of the movie. Patricia's friend and her sister chose to head home at this time, but would see the Grimes sisters standing in line at the popcorn stand. They were in high spirits and excited to see the movie yet again. Their mother knew the movie's runtime, and after each time the girls had attended, they were home before midnight. Although their regular curfew was much earlier than that, this was the exception, and besides, Loretta would always wait up for the giggling sisters to return, telling stories of how amazing Elvis was and swooning over the scenes in the movie. Only this night, Loretta would be sat staring at the door as midnight had come and gone, and yet there was still no sign of her girls. Loretta instructed siblings Teresa, who was 17, and brother Joey, 14, to head out to the bus stop nearest to the house. This is the same bus stop that the sisters would be getting off at. During previous theatre visits, the bus would arrive at approximately 11:45 p.m. This time, however, Teresa and Joey would stand at the bus stop waiting for their sisters to hop off. But 3 bus services would come and go, and still no sign of Barbara and Patricia. They had to return back home to their mother empty-handed, and panic would soon set inside the Grimes house. Loretta would quickly contact the police to report the girls missing, sparking the largest missing persons case in the history of Cook County. A citywide search for the girls was quickly put in place. Hundreds of police officers were assigned to the case, and hundreds more Chicago residents would volunteer to assist in the finding of these young girls. Police were drafted in from other precincts, and extensive door-to-door inquiries were carried out. 15,000 flyers containing a recent photo of the girls were distributed throughout the city. Local parishioners had raised over $1,000 as a reward to anyone that had any information as to the whereabouts of the young girls. The police even dredged several nearby canals and rivers, each time praying that this was not the way that they would discover Barbara and Patricia. As a direct result of this massive and spontaneous investigation, over 300,000 people were questioned, and around 2,000 individuals actually subjected to serious interrogation. On 2 separate occasions, 2 men were arrested and charged due to them openly confessing to having taken the sisters. Both of these cases ultimately collapsed. One of the individuals who had initially admitted to his involvement was a man called Edward Bedwell. We'll come back to him later. After a massive media appeal, the police had yet another large task ahead, sifting through supposed eyewitness reports. Some teenagers said that they were there that night at the theatre and remember seeing the sisters. There were even reports of the sisters seen getting into a Mercury model car, having been driven by a man that was described as looking like Elvis Presley. Despite the overwhelming reports and information pouring in, the police still had little when it came to solid leads. Some investigators also toyed with the idea that the 2 girls simply ran away, a theory which angered their parents. No one knew their daughters like them, and the whole family knew that this was simply not even a possibility. The police had another problem on their hands. By the 31st of December, Barbara and Patricia's faces would be the front page story of every major national newspaper. But the truth of the matter is, at this stage the girls were still only classed as missing, and the case would only be treated as such. By the 9th of January, numerous reports had come in that the girls were sighted in various locations around Chicago. Television and radio appeals were transmitted pleading the girls to contact family or the police. They were still working on the theory that the girls had simply left home of their own accord. Despite theories of the girls running away for whatever reason, one of which was the idea that they may have ran to Nashville to see Elvis in person in concert, Loretta Grimes would take to the airwaves and plead for the girls' safe return. In the dreaded event that the girls had been kidnapped, Loretta would speak directly to any would-be captors, begging them to afford the girls at least a phone call to let her know that they're safe. She even went on to say that she would forgive their actions from the bottom of her heart. On the 19th of January 1957, a televised appeal was broadcast from Elvis Graceland Estate, where a statement read, "If you're good Presley fans, you will go home and ease your mother's worries." This would be followed later by pleas from Elvis himself, imploring the girls to return home safe. 3 days later, on January the 22nd, a construction worker named Leonard Prescott was driving along a rural road in Willow Springs, where, over the silver guardrail, he saw something that he would later describe as flesh-coloured things. He genuinely thought that they may well have been shop mannequins that had been discarded by the roadside. Nonetheless, he returned to the location with his wife for further inspection. On German Church Road, approximately 200 feet from its junction with the South County Line Road, the Prescotts would make the gruesome discovery of two naked frozen bodies that appeared to be that of teenage girls. Police were soon in attendance. The girls' bodies were believed to have been driven to that location and dragged across the guardrail, where they were left on a flat piece of snow-covered embankment. Police quickly suspected that the bodies were in fact that of young Barbara and Patricia Grimes. They contacted their father Joseph to attend the scene to make an identification. Once there, he confirmed that this was in fact his daughters. Barbara exhibited wounds on her chest that was conducive to those made by an ice pick. She also had evidence of blunt force trauma to her face and head. Wee Patricia had several bruises also on her body and head. The immediate area where they were found was searched by over 160 cops and local volunteers. Now listen, it's nice that people want to help and all that, but like most cases we've covered on this channel, with so many people corrupting a crime scene, it's going to hinder rather than help. Chicago PD came under a bit of scrutiny later for this. Autopsies were carried out the following day by 3 experienced forensic pathologists. All 3 of them took 5 hours to roughly examine each of the girls, and still they were unable to conclusively determine a cause of death. After examining the stomach contents of each girl, they determined that the time of death took place within a 5-hour period of them leaving the theatre on the 28th of December. They ultimately ruled the cause of death as exposure and shock. So what about the ice pick puncture marks on Barbara? Well, the forensic experts all agreed that these injuries were inflicted post-mortem, and that any other injuries sustained by either girl was nothing more than rodents after their lifeless bodies were left at the roadside. There were no traces of alcohol, drugs or poison in their system either. This examination also revealed that Barbara had engaged in sexual intercourse shortly before her death, either consensually or not. This was reported because there were no evidence that would normally be a sign of forced intercourse. The official death certificate would list both causes as murder, the specific means of which were listed as secondary shock due to the girls' exposure to the extreme cold temperatures. One of the examiners determined that the girls lay undiscovered on the other side of that guardrail for 3 weeks, being preserved by heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures. If all of this sounds a bit lacking, well, that's because it was. The Cook County Chief Medical Examiner, a guy by the name of Harry Gloss, disagreed with almost every part of the autopsy findings. He publicly stated that he disagreed with the time of death initially determined by the examination, and that the girls clearly bore evidence of physical injury, certainly not caused by rodents post-mortem. Gloss also contended that a thin layer of ice found encrusted upon the sisters' bodies indicated that they had most likely been alive until at least January 7th, since only after that date would there have been sufficient snowfall to react with the girls' natural body heat in such a climate, and thus create the layer of ice discovered upon their bodies at this location. This led him to conclude that their bodies were in fact warm when they were deposited over that guardrail on German Church Road. Gloss also stated that both girls were held captive up until this time, and that both of them showed signs of sexual assault. Swabs taken from young Patricia's body yielded trace evidence of semen. Curdled milk was also discovered during examination of Barbara's stomach contents. Barbara never drank milk at home, and certainly not at the cinema on the night they vanished. So, like I said, Harry Gloss was the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office. He wasn't shy of calling out the poor investigation carried out by these so-called experts. He went on to say that he believed the obvious proof of physical violence against the girls were simply ignored for some strange reason, and that they deliberately omitted the information of the sexual assault. Something was going on, and it needed further investigating. Remember I said earlier that one of the suspects was called Edward Bedwell. So during that part of the investigation, and confession from Bedwell, he spoke about what he did to the girls. With this information, it was clear that it all matched up, yet nothing more was said or done about this. The only thing to come of these statements made by Harry Gloss was him being fired from the coroner's office. Between the girls last being seen at the theatre on the 28th of December and the discovery of their bodies 25 days later, several unconfirmed sightings of the pair were reported to the Chicago police, both in and outside of the city. Numerous people, including a bus driver, had reported to investigators that they had seen the sisters boarding a bus around 11:05 p.m. on South Archer Avenue and heading east into the city, where it was reported that the girls alighted the bus on Western Avenue. Why the girls choose to exit the bus at this location is still unknown. A young man by the name of Roger Menard told investigators that he also attended the same showing of Love Me Tender and had sat in the row behind the sisters and beside Weinhardt. He said that after the movie, he left the theatre just ahead of the sisters, and as he walked down Archer Avenue, Patricia and Barbara were walking a few feet behind him. He recounted a late model green-coloured Buick had slowed and pulled up alongside the girls. The girls hesitated for a brief moment before continuing to walk along past 42nd Street, where now the girls had walked ahead of him. This time another car pulled up alongside the girls. This time it was a 1949 Mercury occupied by two teenage boys. Yet again, the girls were aware of the car, but paid no attention and continued walking in the direction of their home. A security guard named Jack Franklin later informed investigators that he had offered directions to two girls on the morning of December 29th, approximately 12 hours after they had left the theatre. This verbal exchange had allegedly occurred near Lawrence and Central Park Avenues, and Franklin later concluded the girls had been the Grimes sisters, adding the sole reason that he had recalled this conversation was that both girls had been rude and abrupt to him. On the same day of Franklin's alleged sighting of Barbara and Patricia, a friend of Barbara's named Judy Burrow reported to investigators that she had seen the sisters at approximately 2:30 p.m. the next day, walking westward on Archer Avenue. Like I said, there were numerous supposed sightings of the girls. They were seen entering cars, getting on a train, and down at the Naval Training Centre. There were even people that claimed to have seen them all the way in Nashville. All of the supposed sightings unconfirmed, and none of them led to any leads for the police. In the wee hours of the 30th of December, around 5:40 a.m, the owner of the D&L restaurant located at 1340 West Madison reported that he had seen both sisters together. He reported that the youngest looked far too drunk and was staggering. He claimed that they were accompanied by a male person identified later as Edward Bedwell. This location was over 5 miles from the Brighton Theatre. A clerk working at another nearby hotel also confirmed this sighting, and also confirmed it to be the sisters after police took him to view the bodies at the mortuary. Edward Benny Bedwell was a 21-year-old drifter from Tennessee. He had been evicted from his family home before arriving in Chicago's Skid Row area, where he worked as a dishwasher. He was described as tall, and many people would say that he did bear a striking resemblance to Elvis Presley. The restaurant that Bedwell was working at was owned by a couple called John and Minnie Duros. They claimed that in the early hours of December 30th, Bedwell and another male were at the restaurant in the company of the Grimes sisters. This somehow wasn't reported to police until the 24th of January, when Bedwell was arrested and subsequently interrogated for 3 days straight. Initially, Benny Bedwell denied the allegations put forth by Minnie and John Duros, even although another eyewitness at the time corroborated their claims. However, soon Bedwell would sign a 14-page confession to killing the girls, and on the 27th of January he was formally charged with their murders. During his confessions, he said that he and another man called William Cole Willingham were in the company of the young girls from December 30th until January 7th. He went on to say that they spent that whole week drinking together, visiting various saloons up and down West Madison Street, also known as Skid Row. He went on to say that after spending this time with the girls, who were with the men willingly, they fed the girls hot dogs, and only when the girls refused their sexual advances did the men become enraged. They beat the girls to death and discarded their bodies into a snow-filled ditch. After reading Bedwell's confession, Loretta Grimes would go on to say that the confession was a lie and that the girls wouldn't be on Skid Row as they didn't even know where it was. William Willingham admitted that on December 30th he was indeed with Bedwell and they were both in the company of 2 girls. He denies that these girls were the Grimes sisters. He also denies being involved in any murder. Bedwell would later recant his entire confession, saying that he only agreed to confess after 4 days of intense interrogation and the promise of being allowed to leave. The thing is, the initial autopsy reports did actually support Bedwell's recantation, as there were no evidence of any alcohol having been consumed by the girls, nor were there any evidence of them having digested hot dogs. A wee note here is that in 1957, Bedwell was tried and acquitted of the rape of a 13-year-old girl in Florida. He died in 1972. So what about other suspects? There was a 17-year-old lad called Max Flagg that was considered a prime suspect in this case. Due to him being 17, the laws meant that he couldn't be compelled to take a polygraph test. The police captain at the time convinced Flagg to agree to an unofficial lie detector test, which the teenager agreed to do. During this unofficial polygraph test, he allegedly confessed to killing the sisters. Of course, due to the nature of the test being illegal and not admissible as evidence, the police were forced to release him without charge. It's of note that Flagg was later arrested and jailed for the murder of another young woman. In May 1957, Loretta Grimes received an anonymous telephone call from an individual who claimed to have undressed and killed her daughters. Although the Grimes family had received numerous hoax phone calls following the girls' disappearance, this particular caller, having ridiculed police efforts to affix blame upon suspects such as Edward Bedwell, ended his phone call with information indicating that he may indeed have been the perpetrator. I know something about your little girl that no one else knows, not even the police. The smallest girl's toes were crossed at the feet. This caller then laughed before terminating the call. In 2013, retired Chicago detective Raymond Johnson began a personal investigation into this case. He believed that the person responsible was a self-confessed child killer by the name of Charles Leroy Melquist. Melquist was convicted in 1958 of the abduction and murder of another wee lassie called Bonnie Lee Scott. The 15-year-old's body was discovered less than 10 miles from the location of the Grimes sisters. It's believed there were several undeniable similarities between both these cases. The day after the body of Bonnie Lee Scott was discovered, Loretta Grimes received a phone call from an individual who on this occasion claimed responsibility for Scott's murder. On this occasion, the caller stated, "I've committed another perfect crime. This is another one of those that cops won't solve, and they're not going to blame Bedwell." Loretta Grimes would remain adamant right up until her own death that this call was the same person that had called her back in 1957. Charles Melquist was never charged with the Grimes sisters' death and would himself die in 2010. In 2013, James Grimes, the brother of Patricia and Barbara, he was 11 years old when his sisters were killed. He stated that he was welcoming the reopening of the case and went on to say, "I just assumed that it was never going to be solved, but maybe there's hope." That's it for another video, folks. Thanks again for joining me on this wee journey. Like so many other unsolved cases that I've covered, I sincerely hope that in time we get the answers as to who carried out this horrible act. If you're still here, then just know that I appreciate every single one of you. Stay safe, tell someone that you love them, and always keep smiling.